This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined by one of my new friends out of the great city and state of St. Augustine, Florida, Mr. Andrew Smalley, who is the head of school of Veritas Classical School there in St. Augustine. And they're doing some really cool stuff. I met him in person and I was like, I got to have this guy on the podcast because he's doing classical Christian education, which I love, and he's leading the school and he's in the great state of Florida. So why not? Let's have him on the podcast. But before I pass it off to introduce himself, I do want to highlight our amazing sponsors over at America's Christian Credit Union. You guys have heard this before probably, but hey, they're celebrating 65 years of service this year, and they provide essential school banking services and a tuition financing program for schools who are looking to reduce their risk and administrative burden. And you can check out all that stuff on their website at americaschristiancu.com/schools. That's americaschristiancu.com/schools. And my favorite part about them, guys, the tuition financing. If you're a Christian school out there that is having a hard time collecting all the tuition that is owed to you throughout the school year, you can just get an account with them and say, hey, families, go take out a tuition financing loan with America's Christian Credit Union. And then you as the school get all the money up front, and then they will pay off the loan with America's Christian Credit Union. And it doesn't cost your school anything. It's a win-win for everybody involved, so you can focus on teaching and loving your students. So check it out, americaschristiancu.com/schools. All right, jumping into today's episode, we got Andrew Smalley, guys. So I'm going to pass it off to him to introduce himself, and then we'll jump into some nitty-gritty questions and content. So Andrew, welcome to the podcast today, sir.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
It's going to be fun. And I've said this before, I say it to every guest, but I've actually never, and I think we did talk about this when we first chatted, I've lived in Florida for a long time, never been to St. Augustine, even though I've driven up 95 right past it. I've never been there. So I always like to ask if I was to visit, which one day, yes, Andrew, I will visit. I'll come by the school. We go grab a coffee or something. But what do you say? Like, hey, you got to do this in St. Augustine to get the full experience of the city.
Well, Mitchell, I hesitate to tell you too much because obviously tourism is a big deal around here. St. Augustine is apparently visited by over 2 million people every year. So I as much as I love the tourism, and obviously many of my families actually, own restaurants and are part of the tourism industry. I don't want to sell it too much because I don't want to bring too many extra people here, but this is the oldest city in America. And we definitely, take that. The ancient city tagline is used a whole lot. I would definitely want you to, walk the cobbled streets and look at some gift shops and get some good food. Obviously, there's plenty of places that do that. The architecture here is beautiful. So just spending some time with the buildings of Henry Flagler College is here. It's a beautiful space. And then obviously the beach, the beach is right there. So you got to go spend some time on the beach. Water's beautifully warm almost year round. So, our school has a surf club. Of course it does. And so, we're out on the beach as much as we can surfing. So, it's not a bad place to visit. So you need to jump off of 95 and see a little piece of Florida that doesn't really always feel like Florida.
That's good. See, my parents, so I grew up in Florida, but my parents, I think their honeymoon, I believe it was their honeymoon. They honeymooned in St. Augustine right after they got married. And I remember hearing that. I was like, because we grew up in Central Florida way back in the day in Ocala. So it was only a couple hour drive for them to get to St. Augustine. But again, I've never, funny enough, I've never been there. I have friends that live there, but it's never, I got to do it. And if you're into the extraterrestrial, right? And they're like big time ghost tours and stuff in St. Augustine.
There are some ghost tours as well. There's also, I would say, if you want a specific spot, you have to go to Cousteau's Waffle and Milkshake Bar, because that's impressive and well worth it. While you kind of look across the harbor, watch the schooner coming by, watch the Bridge of Lions going up. There's so many good things to be seen.
I'm a foodie, so sign me up. Well, Veritas, we jump into the school itself. Well, I guess actually before we jump into the school, let's jump into you first. So let's give kind of your overarching view of how you got to Veritas, your background in education, just to give the listeners a little bit of background on you before we jump into Veritas. So how did you get to where you are today?
Wow. But God, right? I mean, that's my story. I was born and raised in England and was really looking for an opportunity to be in Christian education. So partially my now wife and partially the opportunity to be in Christian education brought me to Philadelphia. And I worked at a Christian school in Philadelphia for 15 years. Then I spent 5 years in Austin, Texas, prior to coming to be a head of school here at Veritas Classical School. So that's kind of a little bit of my journey to get to where I am.
Man, some big history cities there. You come over to Philadelphia, which is obviously deep rooted in our history, and now St. Augustine. I mean, you're just checking off the boxes there. So born in England, does that mean dual citizen or military family? What's that story?
No, Mitchell, it's really a one-up my sister's story. I came over as a camp counselor. I didn't want to travel in Europe because my languages were not super strong. So I decided to come to America where I could talk to everybody and had a pretty radical conversion on a summer camp in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania, where I just realized that I needed the Lord. And I was in a place that I wanted to serve underprivileged kids on this camp. And I felt like in my own skin and in my own flesh, I couldn't do that, which was absolutely true. I needed God to be able to help me help them. And so that place became very near and dear to me and was a place where I learned to lead. And so I came back summer after summer. And in fact, even my wife and I were there with 3 young children a number of summers ago, just continuing to work out that ministry and helping, really being counselors to the counselors, because there was a lot of international counselors and even American counselors who just needed somebody to talk to, somebody to work with, right? And to be able to deal with some of the challenges of sometimes just being away from home for the first time, and sometimes dealing with, children that they didn't know how to deal with because they were, 18, 19 years old. So definitely some camp ministry in my background that has been very monumental, even for my leadership today.
Man, that's so camp ministry, super foundational in mine as well. So I love that. It's actually how we actually just on Tuesday. So my wife and I co-lead a marriage group at our church. And the couple we lead with, the question that they led with for this last week's discussion was bring a picture of your wedding, like you getting married, and then talking about the highs and lows, like the last, however many years you've been married. And we've been married 9. And so we're talking about, okay, guys, how'd you meet? And so we actually met at a church planning a youth camp. She was a summer missionary. This is up in Alaska, where I'm from, and did my major growing up. And so we met there and we're planning a youth camp. And that's where we got to really know each other, was just ministering to these kids. And I was like, I really like her. And so fast forward all those years later, and now she's my wife. So camp ministry, man, it's a good place to find a spouse.
I mean, I would tell you, I literally watched my now wife walk across camp with 9 or 10 campers following around, and I can literally say, I was like, wow, she's gonna make a really good mom one day. And that was meaningful to me, because I wanted to be I felt like God was gonna call me to marriage, and that I would maybe be a dad one day. I wanted somebody who was gonna be a good mom alongside of me. So yeah, it's definitely a place where foundations are made.
I love it. So anybody listening, get into camp ministry, especially if
you're certainly, I would say to school administrators, if you see that teaching, you see a student stand up in front of class and start being able to teach other students, I would say that is a really great way for them to really begin to, learn what it looks like to manage children, and really classroom management's happening in the cabin as you walk kids around camp. I think it's just a great way for kids to get their feet wet in terms of, potentially being a teacher for sure.
100%. I agree with that. And yeah, you came from Austin over to Veritas at St. Augustine. How many years ago was that?
So yeah, I'm just starting year 3 as head of school at Veritas Classical School.
Okay. And how old is Veritas Classical School?
So we are going into year 7 this year. So we just started year 7. Since I signed on in April of 2021, the school has actually doubled in size almost going into this fall. So we're kind of, it's moving and shaking. It's fun.
Love it. That K8, K12, where are you guys at grade wise?
So we began in the year 1, it was really a K through 7th grade. We are now pre-K through 11th grade.
Okay. I'm assuming adding the 12th next year. Is it like going to finish
Absolutely.
up?
Yeah,
okay.
We are so excited to get to May 2025 and have our first graduating class. As a real thrust. In fact, the school was founded upon the concept of a K-12 classical Christian school. They wanted to see all parts of the trivium all the way through. They did not want to see their students finish school at the end of 8th grade and then go into what was likely the public school system. They felt like they were missing that final component of the trivium. And so the school was actually founded out of that concept of completing a trivium. So our rhetoric school is growing fast. Every year we're getting more students, and it's a very important part of who we are to get to that graduation and that alumni, status that will come with that.
And I'm sure there's going to be multiple kids in that senior graduating class that have been there since day 1, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah, there's a few. It's probably only a couple at this point. But yeah, it's one of the struggles. And I'll get to that is, the challenges of growing that part of the school for sure. But yeah, we have a couple that will be in that group. And it's pretty neat to see, them kind of complete the journey, finish the race, so to speak.
That's cool. Well, perfect segue into challenges. What are some of those challenges you guys are up against right now?
Yeah, so really, I would say managing growth, I think, is a challenge for any school head. Sometimes that can be going the opposite way, but hopefully not. We've got the founding family's expectations of what our school is, and then we have a new family expectations. And so when I talked about the growth that I just talked about, you still have some families that want to believe that this is still just a few families still kind of being together. It kind of feels like more of a homeschool co-op, and all the things that we did back in the day when we had to tear down some walls and put up some walls in, a few days, and, all hands on deck, to a larger organism where the new family's expectations are probably that they won't be putting up walls and doing drywalling as a family in the school, right? So just helping kind of affirm those founding families, because they literally did start a school. Like, I wouldn't be sitting here in St. Augustine, Florida, if somebody hadn't said, well, this is something that we need. But then I have new families coming in who would expect us to be doing programs, and that we would have certain things that maybe we don't yet have. And so just kind of balancing those expectations is probably one of the biggest challenges right now. I think the other one that comes about, and maybe this is kind of a universal challenge for a Christian school, is, we could come across to the city of St. Augustine as a good school. And I believe we are a good school. But I want to be more than that. I want to be recognized as a classical Christian school. And so how we educate our families coming in as to what those two things mean, so that they're not just saying, we don't like this other thing, and so we've heard that you are a better option for us. That I wanted to kind of capture that really at the beginning of 2022 was when I realized, hold up, we can be a really big school, but nobody really understands what it is that we're doing. They need to understand what a classical Christian school is and how it's going to look different than the school down the street. And they may decide that this is not the right place for them. Sure. And, ultimately I'd prefer them to make that decision before they arrive rather than after they arrive, because, having students for a year, it's not great. So you want kids to come, and you want families to come, and you want them to stay and buy into the product that you're working towards.
So you mentioned the classical thing and wanting people to know that. We've had classical Christian guests on the podcast before, because I'm obviously very familiar with that circle, that world. But for those listening that maybe are not, what, in your own words, what would you say, like a parent's interested in coming and they're like, well, I heard from the city or classical Christian school, I don't know what that is. What would you tell them in a way for them to comprehend and understand what all that is?
Yeah, and Mitchell, I love this question because, I told you earlier, I worked in Christian education, and my wife is a product of K-12 Christian education. My father-in-law is a product of K-12 Christian education. So for me to learn what classical Christian education was and the differences was super important. And what I came to learn really is that this is more, for classical education, it's more of a holistic approach, including kind of worldview, going beyond just the classroom to the habits, the thought patterns, the character and culture of a student, and surrounding them with some things from our past that really have shaped who we are today. So we're not really going to be focusing as a school on literature that's close to us, but going back to what has stood the test of time. We're going to be talking about grammar and really reciting and memorizing facts at the younger age. We're going to be dealing with a student in those 7th and 8th grade, which is always a challenging time for anybody. We're going to be basically taking their desire and their natural bent to begin to argue, and we're going to teach them how to do it. And what I always say to parents is, and we're going to immediately regret it, because as soon as they learn how to do it, they want to put those things to test. And I can tell you that my children have heard me say, that was really well said, but I'm your father and it's not happening, right? So they then obviously get to rhetoric stage, which is on 9th through 12th grade, where they learn not only to logically work through an argument, but actually to then place it into a kind of an argument that they can actually give to others, right? And so the aspect of speech, it's just, I think in our current culture, is so undervalued. Unfortunately, we have kids, doing potentially online education. They really never speak to anybody. They don't learn to engage with other adults. And really, Mitchell, to just sum up this section, I think if classical education is anything, it's learning how to help these kids ask great questions. You can ask a great question, you can get a lot of information. And so giving them the personable skills to be able to engage adults and be able to be winsome in their speech gives them a huge leg up in the outside world when they get to it. And maybe they don't know everything, and they don't, right? Maybe we're not so technology heavy, but boy, when those classical Christian school graduates go out into technology, they're asking the questions that a lot of other people are not asking, and they're making huge strides in technology or other areas that you'd think would be like, oh, well, that kid wouldn't know anything about that. Well, they still know how to ask the question that maybe everyone else has just assumed is, just the way things always have been. That student will probably say, well, hey, what about this? And I had a student at my previous school who basically, as an intern in all the white coats sitting around a conference table, was basically put in charge of a group of adults to expedite a new project, because they literally in the back of the room put their hand up and said, hey, well, what have you guys thought about this? And everybody's kind of turning around going, who is that guy back there anyway? And he just knew what the right question was. And so that's kind of that's a little piece of classical education for you.
That was good. That was pretty good. And I think this is I think classical, every school obviously has challenges, of course, but I see this challenge popping up more with classical Christian schools. But everybody listening, like, I want this should resonate with everybody. I feel like schools have a challenge of being able to talk intelligently and quickly about their school in a way that makes a person want to enroll there. And I feel like it'll get really, people love their school. Typically they're excited about their school, but to put it into a 30-second, like, here's who we are, here's what we're about, here's why you should enroll your student.
Yeah.
Like, I see so many schools struggle with that, and
Yeah.
but they're excited and they love it, but they're like, well, you just got to experience it. It's like, yeah, but you got to be able to put it into a way of
Yeah.
like in a video, in an elevator, wherever. And
Yep.
so you get really good. Obviously yours, I didn't tell you to keep it under 30 seconds, but you happen to something that's quick too, to go, here's what it is. Cause you made me go, man, maybe I should move to St. Augustine, so that's,
We have people moving here for us, Mitchell. Maybe you should.
are you guys even full? You're probably full. See, I can't even come in.
I mean, we do have space in a couple of classes, but yeah, we do have people that are calling from across the country at this point who will say, we've heard about you, we want to come. And so, yeah, it's pretty neat to see these families. I spoke to one just last week who said, yeah, we are here in St. Augustine because of Veritas Classical School.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So for those like listening, guys, focus on that elevator pitch, if you will. You can call it anything you want, but like practice it. Don't just try and wing it on the fly when somebody asks, but say, who is our school? What do we want to say? And have not just you, if you're a head of school listening, or a teacher, like the whole school, all staff, even students and families should be able to say, this is who we are, and this is why you should come here to our school. This is why, like they're all marketers for you in the city and then the county that you're around. But they need to know what it is and know what to say, and not be like, we're a Christian school, or we have really good football team. It's like, it's more than that. So that was good.
And as a Christian school, I would say, goodness, like I feel like I'm sometimes in those conversations and I'm literally praying, Lord, show me what, maybe a piece of their educational background that I could just speak to. Maybe they've experienced something that they've liked or not liked that actually does pair or not pair with us as a school. And so I think it's important that we don't just say, well, it's a packaged speech, so that, you're going to hit on a few things, but also be open to the Holy Spirit kind of guiding you how to tell that, as you would in terms of just giving a testimony, right? Some of these families need to understand what it is that Christian education is doing and how foundational. I mean, to have a child in a Christian environment 5 days a week, actually, when parents actually think about that, it actually blows their mind, because when they start to think about, okay, maybe they're in church for a couple of hours on this Sunday, and maybe they're in church for an hour or so on a Wednesday, but when they start to do the math, they realize that actually does not equate to enough time for this to be fundamental to my child. It's just kind of a little blip on their week, not a huge component of their weekly rhythm.
Yeah. And I don't know how many people agree with me on this side. Like, I obviously love my son being in church and being poured into, but I'm not definitely giving the responsibility to my church to say like, hey, it's your fault that my kid isn't diving in as much as he should. That's my responsibility as his father and as the family unit to like, him and I pray every night. We read his little Bible, like, and we're diving into it. Like, that's on me, So like, yes, church is obviously important. I want people in there, but you're right. It's not a lot of hours at all. Like, I mean, of teaching time, maybe 30 minutes to an hour a week if you're going on Wednesday nights and Sunday. So I don't expect a ton of stuff to come from that's foundational, but it's on me. But then you go add church, my foundation at home, and a Christian school education where it's woven into math and social studies and everything. Like, wow, like now we're talking, like that's a lot.
Right. And if those are teachers that want to disciple your child, like that's significant. That's really significant, more so than honestly, and a youth pastor kind of figure, right? Or a youth leader.
We talked about some challenges. There's just stuff obviously there's things that are going good. You've already hinted at some of those, but kind of into the second section, we usually talk about what's any cool wins to share or things that are going really, really good. Is there a semi-small roadmap that those that are listening can be like, ooh, I want to try and do what Veritas is doing in that area?
Yeah, I think, when you, as a small startup school, so obviously year 7, it's a short window of time for us to build a school. Bringing some families that really get what we're doing also allows us to bring some amazing faculty. And so when we are able to retain faculty or recruit faculty from outside of our area, maybe faculty coming from other classical schools, they can bring some baggage, but they also have a clear understanding of the difference in our pedagogy than a public school or private school. So we have we've been recognized as one of the top 3 growing schools. So it has helped us be able to bring some faculty from outside of the state to us. And obviously then you're building that admin. So I think the other piece that I would say that really I'm very happy about is just the admin team. And I think for a school leader, for a head of school, you cannot do everything. You cannot believe that you can do everything. And so putting people around you who can lead out in specific areas and take things from your plate is so, so important. And so having that coherent admin team, I think what I've been able to do, by the grace of God, as I've grown the team, I've been able to just kind of say, oh no, this is your area. Like, this is what I want to see you doing more of. So actually not just saying I'm bringing somebody in from outside, but sometimes saying, I see you, I'm bringing you down from a full-time teacher to a part-time teacher so that you can actually also do this. And then let them learn that role, build that role. They already know the culture of the school. They already know the good things about the school. They may know the bad things about the school, the things they want to change, but letting them kind of grow into that role and become part of that leadership team has been really fruitful and useful, and has added to us a lot. And obviously, just having those people around is just so, so key when you're dealing with stuff, because school leaders sometimes deal with something that just hits the radar that, just knocks you sideways. And I can say that having a few people around me, including a board, to say, okay, we got you. This is what I think you should do. Sending emails, like there's so many times a week that I might send a draft email to a leadership team and just say, hey guys, what do you think about this? And sometimes I've got, looks great. And sometimes I've got, Andrew, are you really sending this email out? Like, this looks like a pet peeve that you have, like this, and then start. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. I'm not sending that email, so just people who can keep me accountable.
That's awesome. And obviously schools across the country are struggling with teacher retention and recruitment. It sounds like that's not really been a problem for you guys as of the whole school being around.
It hasn't. I mean, and that, I think I think what I see is, if you can be passionate about what you're doing, sometimes that also is saying, these are things we're not doing, right? If you're trying to be all things to all people, unfortunately, you're probably going to, rather than you might gain students in the short term, but in the long term, you're probably going to lose ground, because you're really potentially saying, well, we'll do that, we'll do this, we'll do the other. And unfortunately, they'll say, well, no, you're not really doing that at the level I want it to. So I'm leaving, and I'm leaving for this, I'm leaving. And suddenly you realize that your enrollment is going down rather than going up. When you really can state, we do these things, but we don't do these things. Sometimes those same people will jump on the bus just because they can see your conviction to say, this is what they're doing. We would have liked this, but it's okay because we think these things are more important. So they're going to go with you. So yeah, that'd be another kind of word of advice out there.
Let's, like, my favorite saying in like the marketing world is, if you confuse, you lose. And so if you're like putting all this stuff out there and it's just not clear, people will go and go another way. I kind of think about myself with food. Let's go food route. So if I go into a place and I'm looking at different restaurants, maybe let's like talk a mall, if anybody even knows what a mall is anymore. But you go into a mall, you see all these places and you see new places to eat. And I look over and I see a very complicated menu where there is tons of things on the board and there's multiple price points. That scares me off to even go and try it or to like talk about it. But if I go over to, let's say Chick-fil-A, because I love bragging on Chick-fil-A, it's very simple. Would you like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like number 1 through 8? And that's pretty much it. No pickles? Okay, yeah, I want pickles. Like whatever. And it's so simple. So it's like, it's not scary to go up and do it. And I think the same thing for these schools or anything. If you're talking about, hey, here's what all our school does. If it's just a random huge list of all these things, I feel like that's overwhelming for a person. And so same with people looking for a job. If you say, hey, here's your benefits, or here's what we do as a school, and it's the 5 bullet points, or again, I'm not a school that does this regularly, but I feel like you got to keep it simple. And is that kind of what you're saying? You've kept it simple?
Right. Yep. Very important. Yeah. And I think as small as we are, obviously, just about 40 staff on my faculty and staff, you've got to be careful that you don't just have position holders. We're too small for that. Like, I think it's Liz Wiseman who basically talks about having impact players. So what I'm talking about is an impact player who's saying, hey, I really think I could add value by coming out of the classroom part-time and doing this. And I'm saying, I absolutely believe you can, and let's do it. And then, they're encouraging leadership all the way down. Then I think from the top down, we've got to don't underestimate that a pre-K student can be leading out in a pre-K classroom. What does that look like? So we've got to be modeling that all the way down.
Yeah, we don't give kids enough credit, I feel like, especially in our culture, but in the school districts. They are capable of so much, but you've got to give them the opportunity to do that. Not always with the challenging kids, but I guess when I was youth pastor back in the day, I would take the more challenging kids and I would give them a role of responsibility, and nothing crazy. Like, hey,
no, it can be tiny.
Yeah, I want you to be in charge of taking out the trash tonight. Can you take out the trash tonight? And they kind of like, they look in awe of like, you trust me to do something, or you want me to do something? And typically I never got disappointed. Like, maybe they didn't do it the right way, but then it was like clear enough. But like giving these kids opportunities to serve and to lead or to do things, like, really, it helps them get more confidence too. So I love to see schools that are doing that, like letting kids, if it's a 5-year-old, it doesn't matter, like let them lead, let them do something and show another kid how to do something.
Yeah, I've told teachers before, I said, if you're doing something that a student can do, then stop doing it. Like, let a student do that. Like, whether that's leading in prayer, passing out paper, I don't know, but I'm with you in terms of, sometimes it is pulling that student that's starting to seem disengaged and just giving them a role, and they will love you forever. So give them that opportunity, because I think it's showing them who they can become. And obviously that's what we're doing. We're going to send them off, right? We only get to hold on to them for 13, 14 years. They got to go do something elsewhere. We've got to give them the opportunity to be who God's created them to be, which is going to be leaders in their spheres.
That's good. I love it. Well, any other final things to share on the wins thing before I ask you my final question?
I don't think so. No, I think you covered some wins.
You're crushing it. All right. Well, and my last question then for you is, hey, share a piece of advice. You've been doing this a while. Share a piece of advice with the school leaders listening that you would want them to know coming from you.
Yeah, well, it's really coming off of what we were just talking about, which is kind of interesting to me. I'm thinking about the area of leadership for students, and there's some Flourishing Schools research that just came out this past summer, which talks about really the likelihood of alumni walking with God. And this research shows that alumni are twice as likely to be walking with God if they have seen a school that is impacting the wider community. Right? So sometimes we're too insular. Like, we're just kind of like, hey, let's look out for one another. Let's do this little service project that helps this family that's going through this tragedy right now. But if we can get outside of our own school bubble and help those in the community, this appears to make a radical impact on alumnus who has seen kind of faith in action, not kind of the smell of hypocrisy, but they've seen people working out their faith, not just maybe speaking from the front of a Bible class. Right. So, I guess the other piece I would just talk to is really just prayer in general. It's not the least we can do. It is the most we can do. So let's do it. We often kind of depict prayer as like the last resort. Well, I'll pray for you. It's the kind of the final thought. It's not. Burnout is real in kind of school headship, leadership. We need to be praying before we need it and after we need it. So, do that in school. We as a faculty gather for prayer and scripture daily to remind each other of the high calling and ask, God to direct the steps and the words for each teacher and staff member in the building. If we don't do that, we can start to believe that we're the ones that are, doing all this stuff. We're not. We're calling on God to allow us to be the impact players in the kids' lives.
That's good, Andrew. Thank you, sir. Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat. I enjoyed it. I love what you guys are doing at Veritas. I love how it's growing, and I'm excited for you guys to have the first graduating class in a year and a half, almost 2 years or whatever it is, in 2025 of May. But that's
We're
exciting.
towards it. Got to start getting those gowns, you know.
Love it. Well, I appreciate it. Wish you guys nothing but the best as you continue to grow. And if I'm in St. Augustine, I'll be sending you a text and I'll say, let's go check out that milkshake place and go get something. We'll get one of them together. All right.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mitchell. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Andrew for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love what he's doing over at Veritas, and I'm wishing them nothing but the best as they continue to grow and educate the next generation that's coming behind us. And as always, I'm hoping you guys are able to take at least one thing away from today's episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Now, there's some ways to connect with us that I'd love you guys to do if you have not done so already. One of those is our website, schoolsuccessmakers.com. Go over there and sign up for the School Success Report, which is launching this fall. And on the homepage of our website, in the top right, there is a button for you guys to enter your email so you do not miss out when we launch the School Success Report. It's going to have different news articles that we've written and highlights of teachers, shout outs of teachers. We're going to do some giveaways, a lot of fun things when it comes to that newsletter. So we want to make sure you don't miss it. It's going to be a lot of things all about school success. We also have our private Facebook group just for school leaders called School Success Makers. We'd love you to personally go join in there because I'm personally in there and I'd love to see you in there as well. And it's completely free. It doesn't cost you anything. So go connect with some of the other school success makers that are out there. We'd love to have you in there. If you guys have any comments, concerns, ideas, or anything, we'd love to hear from you. You can do that through our website on one of our contact forms. If you have any ideas for the podcast or people we should interview. And I think that's it. There's so many new things. So please connect with us. And if you haven't yet, 5-star review for the School Success Podcast. If you love what we're doing for this content, we'd greatly appreciate it. Share it out on your Instagram, your Facebook, wherever you guys are on for social media. We'd love that and appreciate it very, very much. All right. I think that's it now. So we'll be back here next week with another amazing guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.